שהנשיא פזשקיאן שוקל להתפטר מתפקידו. מוקדם יותר שוחחתי עם גורמים בסביבתו של פזשקיאן והם אמרו לי כך: ישנו זעם חריג מצד הנשיא על משמרות המהפכה. ההתנהלות שלהם נתפסת כמופקרת ופזשקיאן אף טוען כי הם לא שמרו על עלי לאריג'אני כנדרש. לא מדובר רק בכשל אלא במהלך מכוון שנועד להוביל לחיסולו.
What's going on in this life? What's going on, man? What's going on? People tell me, please, what's going on?
So it appears that Iran is now trapped in yet another chaotic and dramatic secession crisis after it was announced this morning that one of the de facto leaders of the country, which is to say somebody who's really in charge, given that we have no idea who is running Iran right now. We personally believe on this channel that the Supreme Leader may likely be comatose or even dead. The IRGC claims control, but they're contradicting the words of the president. It's a big, gigantic mess, but that's all to say the person who it is alleged was actually running Iran at the moment was wiped out via an Israeli airstrike. And the chaos it's caused since includes the fact that apparently the president of Iran is trying to resign, but he can't resign because the Supreme Leader is once again likely dead or comatose. This comes after the IRGC was publicly calling out the president, basically implying that he was a liar or a traitor. And it's this big, gigantic mess. And today I want to explore some of the potential implications of this Israeli strike on Ali Larijani because, you know, this could go either one of two ways. Some have argued that this may be a strategic mistake because it may, in the end, just give more power to the emboldened and hardlined IRGC. On the other hand, you could also make the case that, well, the power vacuum here being left behind and the very clear message to Iran's current leadership, hey, there's nowhere to run, there's nowhere to hide, could, in the end, basically wipe out so much of the top leadership that, in the end, there are only lower-level officials terrified for their lives and now will probably have to sue or seek for some type of negotiation. We'll explore that. We'll talk about the implications of it all today, but we'll bring you that news as well as, again, some of these reports out of Iran that there's a lot of chaos happening in the government. Again, nobody knows who's really in charge. So let's tell you about it, guys. First, though, do us a favor. If you enjoy our content, make sure you hit that like button down below. Subscribe to the channel if you are new. We greatly appreciate the support, but it also ensures that you can stay up to date with all of the latest news and coverage. And that said, as we just got the news this morning, let us begin here, where top Iranian official Ali Larijani and the Basij commander here, another guy by the name of Soleimani, were killed in a series of overnight strikes, according to the IDF. Take a listen.
According to Israel's defense minister, Israel Katz, top Iranian official Ali Larijani is dead. He was killed in a strike overnight, according to Israel's defense minister. This was probably the most significant strike, you could describe it, in the past week and a half, as the Israelis and the Americans are going after the structure of Iran's regime. Larijani was largely considered the de facto leader in the aftermath of the killing of Iran's former supreme leader and uncertain questions about Mojtaba Khamenei, the man who was elected to be the next supreme leader. Larijani was serving as the secretary to Iran's Supreme National Security Council. I can also report overnight the Israelis, in a separate strike, killed the top commander of Iran's Basij forces. This is a wing of the IRGC. His name is Ghulam Reza Soleimani, and he was responsible for commanding the crackdown on protesters earlier this year across Iran. An official tells me this morning that over a dozen Basij officials were with him when that strike took place, taking out this top commander. It comes as the Israelis have launched a series of airstrikes alongside their American counterparts across Iran over the past 24 hours. You can see some of these strikes on Sunday, this new video released by the IDF. They are expected to intensify and increase in the hours and days ahead.
Yeah, so what we can certainly say is that Iran has once again lost even more of its remaining top and senior leadership. So that in mind, who exactly was this Larijani character? Well, let's tell you about that, because what we know on one hand is that not only was he one of the top officials of the regime, rumored largely to be the person really running the country at the moment, but he particularly comes from the Supreme National Security Council of the regime, which tends to be more on the hardline side. We further know that he did have an explicit role in the massacre of the protesters just a couple of months ago. And as it pertains to his current, or I guess we could say former rhetoric towards the United States throughout this conflict, it at least publicly has not been all that friendly. You can see him on March 2nd declaring, quote, "We will not negotiate with the United States." Furthermore, on March 12th, he said, "Trump says he is looking for a speedy victory. While starting a war is easy, it cannot be won with a few tweets. We will not relent until making you sorry for this grave miscalculation. Hashtag Trump must pay." And we now know that he is no longer around to negotiate with the United States either way, because he is, of course, deceased. And this is a guy who clearly was talking a lot of crap. And then in the end, he's now been, of course, taken out. We see stuff like this of him as well. Just talking a bunch of crap here publicly. So that's what we know on one hand. And certainly this is not exactly a good guy that we're referring to here. On the other hand, and we did speak about this actually previously, the Larijani family, at least prior to the outbreak of this conflict, were largely seen within the Iranian regime as the more moderate pragmatists, which was to say that, well, if there was someone who was willing to negotiate or have talks or make some type of deal with the United States, it was this sort of existing belief that that might come from the Larijanis, especially, we talked about this before, not Ali, but his brother Sadiq Larijani was one of the figures that was potentially slated to be the supreme leader, and then it was alleged that the hardliners tried to rush through the potentially comatose or dead Ayatollah's son in order to prevent any type of negotiation being made with the United States there. So, there's that other angle to this. So the reason we're bringing that up is because many now are making the argument that, well, you just took out the guy who might have been willing to negotiate with the United States. And as a result, the power vacuum is only going to embolden the Revolutionary Guard and give the hardliners even more power in the regime. And perhaps that's not something that should have been done. And certainly that's an argument I can see. On the other hand, I would point out that, well, again, I don't know what he was saying behind the scenes, but even if before the outbreak of the conflict, he was believed by intelligence sources to be some type of pragmatist, I mean, publicly, he was, of course, stating he would not negotiate with the United States. And if it was true that he was the current de facto effective leader of the Iranian government, and we've seen thus far how the Iranian government has not really sought for peace, right? They've been actually, even the moment about a week ago or so, where it seemed like there was about to be sort of this forward moment where maybe the hostilities had died down in the war. And then Iran started sending suicide bomb boats toward the Strait of Hormuz. So, if that's the other thing to consider, is if it's true this guy was really in charge and you look at his current actions, again, doesn't matter if before the war we thought he was a pragmatist. Clearly, it doesn't seem at the moment like he's acting like a pragmatist or someone particularly we could negotiate with. So this is to say, I see both sides of the argument. I see the argument that it might embolden the hardliners even more because the power vacuum of sort of the one moderate voice is left. At the same time, we also have to ask the question, was this guy really the so-called moderate pragmatist voice? I think those questions there all remain to be seen. That's why my current attitude on this right now is essentially a wait and see, right? Wait and see what happens. Because, yeah, it is true. The IRGC might be more empowered as a result of this. It's also true that because we once again are dealing with a power vacuum, and I speculated since the start of this war that likely the lower level and oftentimes younger officials in the Iranian government and military leadership are probably not as ideologically fanatic as, say, the older geriatric generation who comes from the revolution. It could also be the case that the younger the leadership gets and the lower level they are, you could see more people maybe more willing to actually be pragmatic about this. That's a possibility. Or likewise, because they don't want to get killed like all of their top bosses are, that's also something we could see. So, this, again, is potentially a questionable decision. I am going to reserve judgment on it, but just wanted to kind of explain both sides of this, right? So those cases have been made mutually. That said, we are getting the reports right now that apparently the whole event here has caused a bunch of upheaval and drama within the Iranian government, which obviously it should if you lost your de facto leader. But there are further reports that Iran's president, this guy Pezeshkian, however you say that name, allegedly was trying to submit his resignation to the supreme leader today, but both because of the drama caused by the Larijani strike, combined with the fact that we don't know if the supreme leader actually exists or is alive, he wasn't, quote unquote, available to accept that resignation. And so now you have this whole weird dramatic situation, right? where you have a president trying to get out. He's not allowed to get out. We've covered in the past some of the drama he's having with the Revolutionary Guard. So it's this big, gigantic mess. And to make a long story short, that's the current state of the Iranian government. Nobody knows who's in charge. It's a total power vacuum, a total disaster. And now yet another one of their top leaders has been wiped out after he publicly stated, I repeat, we will not negotiate with the United States. So, something to consider.
בדיוק, זאת השורה, רעידת אדמה של ממש באיראן. לאחר החיסולים הלילה, אנחנו מפרסמים שהנשיא פזשקיאן שוקל להתפטר מתפקידו. מוקדם יותר שוחחתי עם גורמים בסביבתו של פזשקיאן, והם אמרו לי כך: ישנו זעם חריג מצד הנשיא על משמרות המהפכה. ההתנהלות שלהם נתפסת כמופקרת, ופזשקיאן אף טוען כי הם לא שמרו על עלי לאריג'אני כנדרש. לא מדובר רק בכשל, אלא במהלך מכוון שנועד להוביל לחיסולו. בעקבות החיסול, פזשקיאן שוקל להתפטר, והוא אף ביקש להיפגש עם המנהיג העליון מוג'טבה כדי להציג בפניו את הדברים, אך נהנה כי בשלב הזה פגישה כזו אינה אפשרית. מגי, הדברים שאני מביא הערב, הם מתחברים יותר מכל החשיפה שהבאנו בשבוע שעבר על המחלוקת במשטר האיראני. משמרות המהפכה נגד עלי לאריג'אני, להזכירכם, משמרות המהפכה חשפנו כאן שכבר הכינו תיק חיסול על אותו לאריג'אני ועל אחיו סדק, אז לא מן הנמנע שמשמרות המהפכה מאושרים מאוד מהחיסול היום של לאריג'אני, ואפשר להגיד היום ב100%. משמרות המהפכה שולטים באיראן, מוג'טבה חמינאי, המנהיג העליון, הוא הבובה של משמרות המהפכה. איראן עוברת לשלטון צבאי וקיצוני שכנראה לא ייכנע לעולם עד למהפכה במדינה שאותם יובילו האזרחים שאנחנו מקווים כבר היום מהערב.
So that's really interesting and honestly kind of head scratching, assuming that this is all true, which is, so the president is trying to resign, but he can't. He's being forced to remain the president because the Supreme Leader is likely just a cardboard box. What the heck is going on? Who's really in charge of this country? We have no clue. But I did find it interesting there, the reports, and they do seem to be true based on just the outside evidence that we can see, is that the president of Iran is actually very angry at the Revolutionary Guard for what he has called reckless behavior. I want to remind everyone that we actually reported on this previously, how, if you remember, a couple days ago or weeks ago, I think by now, the Iranian president actually came out and apologized to the Gulf states like Qatar, UAE, Saudi Arabia for striking them during the outset of the conflict, basically saying, oh, our forces were confused, they didn't really have orders, we don't mean to drag you into this war. And what was that? Ultimately a pragmatic announcement, right? He wants to try to stand down and, not get too many countries united against him and make it seem like the Iranian government is willing to maybe have some moderate solution to all of this, blah, blah, blah. But then we also told you about how hours after the presidential apology to the Gulf states, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard came out in response and basically said, he's lying, we're not going to stop striking the Gulf states, and they actually publicly told the Iranian people, do not listen to anything the president has to say. So if there's any true pragmatist or potential, person we could talk to within the Iranian regime, it does seem actually like potentially the Iranian president of the parliament and that whole deal over there is potentially an option there. But right now, it seems that the IRGC is basically trying to coup him or force him out of power so that way they can take over the country. And certainly that's an area of concern. For sure, right? And it does kind of call into question, hey, well, if you just empowered the Revolutionary Guard even more, then was this strategically smart? By the way, considering it was carried out by Israel, what does America think of this? What does the Trump administration think of this? I find it curious that we haven't really seen much of a U.S. comment or U.S. response to Larijani or what their thoughts are on this. So these are all questions to be had for sure. What I would say on the other hand, though, I know I'm kind of sitting on the fence in this video, but I'm genuinely saying, right, this is sort of a wait and see situation. The other counter argument is that, once again, now you have a country that has even less leadership. If nobody's really in charge and these lower level officials with very little credibility are trying to run the show, very likely you'd have to imagine that's not going to last very long, right? They might be temporarily emboldened because, oh, we're at war, we're going to fight the United States. But really, without any true ruling credibility, then where do you derive your authority from as a government? What we know currently is that the IRGC is essentially trying to use the credibility of the supposed supreme leader, right, the Ayatollah's son. But we repeat here, we have not seen this guy publicly at all whatsoever, okay? Even in these statements he's releasing, they're only written statements. So That is to say, it seems very likely there were some reports he's either comatose or dead, or who knows, potentially he's even being held hostage by the IRGC. If this is all true, if this is all the case, and the rather almost hilarious and ridiculous scenario is true, that Iran is pretending to be a functional government with a literal fake supreme leader who doesn't exist, right? A cardboard box is actually the ones actually basically running the country, then in that case, I would also point out that, well, that charade can only last for so long, right? At a certain point, likely you'd assume it has to come out that your supreme leader is not a real person. And then at that point, where do you derive your governing authority from, if that kind of scenario there is true? In that case, I would say that, well, Revolutionary Guard or not, I mean, again, doesn't seem to me that's a lie you can sustain for so long. And then what happens when you're no longer able to sustain that lie? Are you able to govern the country? We have no idea. By the way, as it pertains to the Revolutionary Guard, okay, but who's even in charge of them? I mean, their commander, from what I remember, was also wiped out on day one of Epic Fury. You know, you have lower level people running it from within, but at the same time, you also have to imagine that if top leadership ends up being handed over to lower level officials, even within the Revolutionary Guard, is it necessarily true that they're as hardline or fanatic as even the people above them? Or maybe do they not want to meet the same fate as the other leaders? And that's something also we have potentially seen the signs of within Iranian forces, right? This sort of internal drama where lower level officers don't really want to go along with this anymore.
עימותים בהנהגה האיראנית בצל המלחמה מתגברים. אנחנו מפרסמים הערב על עימות חריף בתוך מערכת הביטחון האיראנית. עימות שלהבנתנו הותיר גורמים בתוך המשטר עמומים, בעיקר משום שהסיבה לעימות הוא המצב בשטח. שוטרים ולוחמי בסיג' בדרגים הנמוכים מתחילים להישבר, התקיפות של ישראל ושל ארצות הברית מתעצמות, הן מדויקות ואישיות, לא רק נגד גנרלים שמסתתרים בבונקרים, אלא נגד הלוחמים הפשוטים שמוצבים במחסומים בתוך שכונות בטהרן. לפי המקורות שלנו, מפקדים בדרגים הנמוכים מתעלמים מהוראות שמגיעים מטהרן, וקיים כאוס לאורך שרשרת הפיקוד.
So that could be another angle to this, right? Is that I think mutiny by lower level officers has to be considered as a possibility, because after all, if they're standing there watching this and saying, okay, what is the point of this? Why do we keep going when all that's happening is we're just getting bombed a bunch? And then, hey, even if their senior leadership is removed and they basically come and say, oh, well, we're actually in charge now. Okay, are we sure we want to keep on fighting this war, especially in the same way that we've been doing thus far? That's a possibility that has to be contended with, I would argue. But big picture, I think what's pretty also undeniable is that whatever the end outcome is of Operation Epic Fury, the writing is already on the wall for the Iranian regime. What do I mean by that? Because I know that we've had some voices out there who say, oh, well, look, the Iranian regime is still intact, so therefore regime change has failed, and so Operation Epic Fury as a whole was a fail. To which I say, I don't actually think the situation in Iran right now is that simple, right? As we've been covering, there's all these internal problems within the government, and sure, while it is the case right now that you could argue they have a rallying cry, right? They've been emboldened because they're at war, and that's sort of the unifying factor here. Let's also not forget that not just their supreme leader, but most of their entire top leadership structure has now been wiped out or assassinated. At a certain point, especially say a month or several months from now, the reality is going to begin to set in that we don't actually have leadership in this country. And maybe the old leadership who was sort of there and had credibility is no longer existing. And so what happens at that point, right? That's the moment at which you begin to see things like, say, coups, mass protests, internal collapse, right? Because it's also true sometimes that, hey, regime change can happen in the formal sense that, oh, you know, like Saddam Hussein, you invaded the country and toppled them. It could also happen because, oh, well, in time from now, so our economy's wiped out, our military's wiped out, our government is dysfunctional and constantly fighting and coups and civil war. At a certain point, it just caves in on itself. And I think, again, not knowing what the end outcome of Larijani's assassination or right now Epic Fury is going to be, I think that is the one aspect of this that is inevitable, right? The Iranian regime as it currently exists, even if they're pretending to be unified right now off the basis of fighting a war, long term is done, right? And as it stands as this like hostile, anti-American actor who was launching ballistic missiles at stuff and trying to build nuclear weapons and, basically giving China a choke point in the Strait of Hormuz. I think that part of it has already largely been resolved and is going to be resolved long-term as a result of this, but it's also going to be a question of, well, certainly you want to see a publicly successful outcome to Epic Fury, right? So hopefully it ends in some type of deal, some type of thing that we can claim as a victory, right? But, I'm just pointing out long-term, I think that, as it stands for the Iranian regime, they're done, right? There's no way you can govern as a stable, functioning body with all this infighting, with all this chaos, with all this question of who is really in charge, cardboard supreme leader. I'm not very confident, frankly, in their long-term chances. But anyways, that said, guys, let me know your thoughts on this whole situation in the comment section down below. Be sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you are new, and until next time, God bless and peace.